these features like interoperability as an example. But ultimately, this does leave XRP with only one option. It basically means it's becoming that settlement layer that will underpin not only fiat, but digital currencies, stable coins, etc., tokenized commodities, bonds, and even carbon credits now. And when people start to ask, the question about market cap, and I dismiss market cap really. I don't think it's not
Silly
something that
argument.
it's a really stupid one. Yes. Or even price range, you have to understand, like, what are we truly looking at to handle the magnitude of all of this, right? And that's when we start having those discussions about a very high XRP price.
Let
And
me
in
let me quote.
yeah,
Pardon me. Let me quote Jake Claver. He said, I'm tired of all these market cap limitation arguments. What exactly is the market cap for email?
yeah, it's silly.
What
And
a great question.
well, I mean,
What if you had
mhm,
to buy some tokens in order to use your email? What's
yeah,
the email token going to be worth? What was it worth in 1980? What would it be worth 10 years later? Another 10 years later, another 10 years later. Would it not be worth hundreds of trillions of dollars?
yeah.
Yes.
But
And
in XRP, it's a bit different. And I totally agree with that and the sentiment behind it. But when a lot of listeners, they start to look at XRP, first of all, they treat it as a token. They don't realize it's been mixed in with a lot of the nonsense out there. But in XRP, liquidity is not necessarily about how many tokens actually exist in the circulating supply. It's about how much value can actually move through the system overall in each XRP itself. And that kind of ties us into the discussion we'll get into here in a moment. But the higher the price is of XRP, the more greater its liquidity efficiency is. And that means
exactly.
fewer and fewer tokens are going to be required to settle larger and larger transactions. And I did write an interesting article about this on X. It's getting a lot of coverage, and I really appreciate that from the rest of the community. But I gave an example in there that if you're trying to settle, for instance, worth $1 billion of a cross border settlement, and if you had at $1 per XRP, that transaction would require 1 billion XRP. But if you had a $10,000 XRP, just to give an example, per XRP, that means it would require just 100,000 XRP. So you're significantly having fewer and fewer tokens moving across that network because there's less slippage, there's lower volatility, there's
Friction.
faster finality. Exactly.
Less friction.
Very exciting.
And
It is exciting. I'm very optimistic about this.
that's why the big players with their big usage and their big volume and their big savings are going to want a big price.
Exactly. It's
It's
beautiful.
not very difficult to follow that logic. I've
Mm.
actually had some good arguments with people who are what I consider to be uninformed. I don't want to call them ignorant.
Not your
Ignorant.
brother again, right?
No. I haven't talked to my brother in 5 years.
Okay.
5 years. I know that's hard to believe, but I
No,
have no interest in further communication with my brother.
I'm sorry. But yeah, that
But,
kind of goes back to the pandemic. It really destroyed
well,
lives
yeah.
and affected families.
Well, if you're going to advocate Marxism in the United States and be an opponent to liberty and the republic, there's the door. Uh,
Yeah, I know
I,
people
I,
like that.
I have no interest in a conversation with them.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry. Hmm.
I don't know where you want to go next.
No,
I'm
actually,
open.
I mean, if you
I'm
don't
open.
mind, I mean, we can always remember we can bounce back and forth, and
Sure.
it's for us to bounce back and forth because there are so many other pieces in this that are all tied together. I do want to talk about what has transpired since we last spoke, and I'm sorry to the audience that it took a while to do part two, but since we spoke, gold has made a significant move, and not just in price, but in purpose, and that's what's so important for people to not miss out on. It's not just a passive store of value anymore. It's gradually being reintegrated back into the monetary architecture as collateral. And when we start to dig even deeper into this, and I want to get your take on this, Jim, I'll ask you here in a second, behind this transformation, how gold is actually being remonetized at the institutional level, and of course, how XRP is being positioned as the settlement mechanism above that that overlays it all. So I know you have been analyzing this for a while in depth since we last spoke. And I want to ask, what are you seeing really in terms of gold's role? How it has it changed in the last 6 months? And of course, how is it tying into what banks are doing globally and even XRP?
I think the big shift in the mindset regarding gold is that it's no longer thought of as a barbaric metal. It's no longer thought of as in terms of what income it can produce. And I got to say, Warren Buffett, you're a big fat liar. He got called away. He got called away after selling
Mark
covered
Cuban
calls.
too. Mark Cuban. I just want to put that out there.
Oh, okay, good. They got called away after writing covered calls, and they lost their silver. Well, Warren Buffett, I don't know the full story about Mark Cuban. He's a bit of a detestable figure.
He's a liar.
What I what I believe has happened is that there is it's hard to call it a transformation. It's a complete shift of mindset and perception. We now are recognized as having entered a tremendous unresolvable problem of having a debt foundation. We have a debt foundation and we got a gigantic debt. And we've been told that debt is a good solid foundation, but now the big fat $38 trillion debt is causing the entire global financial system to stutter, to fail. For instance, big banks in the United States are not lending institutions anymore. They've lost, I think, 3/4 of that function. Unless and until, for instance, the Wall Street banks and the big bank giants in the United States realize an enormous gain with XRP, they might no longer be insolvent, then they can go back to becoming a lending institution again, instead of a predatory institution that captures commercial property because they won't roll over the mortgages. Hand over your keys. I know one case, Northern Midwest, my client's friend lost $20 million because they couldn't find a rollover of their mortgage on a big property complex. Okay, so the realization, Versan, is that gold is a really effective foundation. Foundation. We need to rebuild the foundation. We got a lot of gold out there, and some nitwits, knuckleheads think, well, gold should go way down to $100 per ounce because there's so much of them.
Yeah,
so much
silly.
gold. And I tell them, this is my response, and I'm sassy. I'm always sassy. There are a lot of television sets in US and Canada. There are a lot of shoes. Why doesn't the price of TV sets go down to $20? There's a lot of supply. The reason is they're not for sale. There's a lot of gold. It's not for sale. It's set up and it is now promised to be the foundation. And I'm just waiting for more and more digital assets to become gold related, linked to gold in some fashion. But I don't want to go down that road. I want to focus on how there's a widespread global recognition that the king dollar has destroyed the global foundation for finance.
Very powerful statement. Very true.
And XRP is very likely the top candidate to replace the Treasury bill for global trade payments.
I agree.
Let's leave out the Forex reserves because that's the other side of, it's trade payment standard and global reserves standard. But that's pretty much up in the air and a lot of dispute. And, it's integrated with stable coins. And I think, I just think it's just a time bomb before Tether has a volcano that resembles diarrhea.
I love your analogies.
I like my metaphors. I work on my metaphors in my quiet time. Let me also say, here's another one. SWIFT is the standard bearer of banking obsolescence.
Interesting. Haven't heard that one before.
7% errors. I just had an error last week, a SWIFT error. Cost me 3 days. SWIFT error, 7% SWIFT errors. Okay, those SWIFT morons, you got to get with the 20th century here. I'm sorry, 21st century, and get in gear. And I'm afraid I would really like to hear that SWIFT is relegated to memos. Okay, hey, runner. I love that. A commodity broker would say runner, and every time he did, I would laugh because I met him for lunch in Chicago. It was a very interesting meeting. Commodity traders, mostly bonds, currencies, and not a lot of other things. S&P futures, stock futures, but not cotton, not copper contracts. No, there was, oh gosh, what is it? The euro dollar contracts. We had lunch and I learned a bunch of different things. Runner. I want SWIFT to become the runner, and the runner for managing the Ripple XRP transfers. Okay, we're ready. We're ready, Ripple. We're ready. We got A and B all set here. No nostro vostro. I did my job with the memo because that's all I do now at SWIFT. Oh my gosh, SWIFT! If they're not careful, if they pick the wrong fights, they're going to be shown the door.
I think it's already happening little by little, but a few things to tackle on what you said over there, and going back to gold too, because one thing we can look at, there are so many moving pieces to all of this, but one thing we can certainly look at is the US debt. They say it's 37 trillion. I put a tweet out today. I don't agree it is 37. In fact, I think it's way over 150 trillion because you have to factor
at
in
100. At 100.
Yeah, maybe even two, right? But you have to factor in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government expenses, the black budget, and that is something bigger. And I think over time, when with all this other frameworks being put in motion from the central banks and so forth, and all the gold buying, there's certainly another quiet story happening behind the scenes. And my point, though, is that it's going to get to a point where eventually blockchain, when we're talking about Ripple Net, it's going to expose and provide that transparency that's going to show the full picture. And I think that's a kind of moment where you could start to see gold really be at these very high valuations, like being reset, revalued, if you will, like $10,000, $20,000 an ounce. It's not fantasy, it's just math. We've spoken to people in the past who have been in the financial sector, in the gold space, specifically in Switzerland. They came up with the numbers in 2022 that gold should have been 87,000 an ounce when you factor in everything. And
Factor
where
in
am I bringing
the money supply? Factor in the
Yeah,
money supply.
that's one piece of it. Certainly, I agree with you. But in essence, what I think is playing out is that gold, again, being integrated back into the system. For those, listen, the analysis is not theoretical of some of the things we've talked about here. And you and I talked about this before, maybe 2 years ago. But the mechanisms are clearly being laid out through institutional adoption, institutional behavior, central bank positions, liquidity being focused around regulatory frameworks. What regulatory frameworks? We're talking about the IMF, the BIS. Now, my point, though, is that gold is going to provide stability and intrinsic value for where this is all going. And I think XRP is going to be that layer, enable settlement, transfer that can move value like gold across markets, creating a bridge for traditional and digital finance. But the trend is clear, in my opinion. I think gold is going to anchor value, and I think XRP will move it efficiently. I mean, this is what the infrastructure is telling me years before it may happen.
I think we're going to see a reval, Bursan. We're going to see a reval. It's not going to be just one item. It's not going to be just one asset. How would it be if you distract from the XRP reset reval? If you have a $20,000 gold reval, you have a $150 silver reval, or 200 reval for silver, and at the same time you reval your XRP to be 1,000 or 2,000. Now that's a big jump for XRP. That'd be like 1,000 would be 400 from what it is now.
You're basically saying, to complement it, basically if gold's price is quietly being revalued at some point to support this new system, basically to backstop the tokenized reserves and these debt instruments, it's very possible we're going to watch the early stages, but eventually get to a place where global repricing takes place. And that will actually require XRP to match that value that's flowing across.
And the gold reval and silver reval will be a distraction. People won't focus entirely on the fact that they just jumped XRP more than 100-fold. And that will be to enable its proper designed function.
Yes.
We cannot have a global adoption of XRP with a $50 price. It will not work. So what we might get is a segmentation coming, where there'll be some BRICS nations, there'll be Japan, Korea. I think the United States is going to be a laggard. We're going to be a laggard. We're not leading. We're not leading jack shit. We're leading in congressional disunity. We're leading in civil war. We're leading in election fraud. We're leading in border disputes where we can't even control our own borders. We're leading in cartel warfare. We're leading in bickering, partisan bickering that shuts down a stupid shit government. We're not leading in jack shit. That's why I think we're going to be following the rest of the world. And I just read an article today. It said Japan is now considering that they should follow the BRICS movements and initiatives rather than the Western, because the Westerns are so bent on war and bickering.
Well, I think they're fighting for survival, and they're just disguising it as national security. And here's another thing to your point. I actually tweeted this like a year ago, that it's, if you look very closely at some of the things we talked about, Jim, it would seem that something is being built called ARC, where basically America, Russia, and China are going to have a coalition against the European countries. And where I'm going with this is interesting. I'm going to ask you about it, and I want your honest, unfiltered take without getting me kicked off YouTube, if that's possible. But it's very possible that if you look closely at everything, it seems that we're moving in the trajectory of the BRICS nations, but we're not calling it that. And we just keep showing American strength when really, I mean, example, 16 states in the US are now putting laws in place to make gold and silver legal tender. We are looking at silver, and we talked about this last time, where it might even become a strategic asset for our government. So if you look closely, right, yeah, that was very interesting. Exactly, right? So when you start to think about these things, and this is where I want to get your thoughts on, because this really ties this conversation together at a much deeper level. For many years, we've talked about this, but we're now talking about the restructuring of global finance. We're talking about gold reemerging as collateral. We're talking about XRP forming that digital settlement layer. But behind all of this, and this is where the other discussion comes in, there's that old story of the old guard, the entrenched financial power structures, the deep state, the banking cabal, whatever you want to call them, this architecture. These are the same entities that control the legacy systems, intelligence, defense, big finance. Do you think that they're going down, or are they fighting right now? And, what are your true thoughts about this ongoing battle? Because I think while we're witnessing some form of decentralization expand, we're seeing also the opposite take place, the rollout of digital IDs, the tokenization of everything, own nothing and be happy, the increasing control mechanisms that are wrapped in language and innovation. You know what I mean? So it's something I worry about quite often, and I've made it very clear I will not participate in the system if they try to force some chip into my skin or something along those lines.
I call it the banker cartel.
Sure.
And they've got a cartel business model, and it's loaded with profit, and it enables fraud. It permits fraud with impunity, insider trading. I mean, JP Morgan, duplicate serial numbers for treasuries, a certain building in South Manhattan that went down. Yeah, loaded with that kind of data. I believe 9/11, I'm sorry, that infamous day in September, 24 years ago.
Thank you.
That was a bank event. That was a banker event. I believe the banking cartel is now on notice. You adapt to the digital framework, or you're obsolete and you will not be able to compete. You will not be able even to be included and integrated. I gave an example to a client during a consult call. Imagine there are four big banks, maybe think of 4 Wall Street banks. And one of them says, we don't want to join the digital transformation. We don't want that architecture. We don't want that. We're going to stick with what we have. We're comfortable. We're comfortable. We know what we have. We're comfortable. And we got a nice business profit model. We're comfortable. 6 months later, they're out of business. Okay, so adapt, get integrated, or become obsolete. You're not going to be shown the door. You're going to be outside looking in. All right, so now the whole battle changes form. Verson, this is really delicate stuff.
Oh, I know.
And here's how I put it in real terms now. BlackRock and JP Morgan said, we want to be involved in the control of this. Ripple, how do we do it? Work with us. Mm-hmm. We're not going to hand you the keys to the kingdom and have Ripple with a bank license, and we all work with you. And before you know it, Stellar has a bank. Before you know it, Hedera has a bank. Before you know it, other, Cardano has a bank. And then all of Wall Street's working for you guys. It's not going to work that way. So BlackRock and JP Morgan asked Ripple, how do we get there? Can we become partners without killing each other, without crushing each other in competition? And that's why I think they're holding it down under 250 with XRP. And that's why I think BlackRock is looking for 3 to 5 billion coins. JP Morgan is looking for 3 to 5 billion coins. And a couple of other Wall Street banks are looking for the same, so that they can earn $100 billion and be major players for the next chapter.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take, and I do appreciate it, because I've thought something very similar too. My brother and I have had this concern. We feel like we're witnessing this very strange convergence. You have decentralization on one hand, and you have centralization happening simultaneously. Because blockchain was really built to empower sovereign individuality, transparency, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, we do see giants like BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan tokenizing assets and inserting themselves as gatekeepers of this new digital economy. And that's almost, in my eyes,
they can't execute the trade. They can't execute the transfer
without XRP.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
That's the partnership.
But this is where it gets weird, though. It's almost like the deep state. Two things to this. Okay, deep state realized, you know what, we can't stop this technology, so they decided to co-opt it to a degree. We can argue on that.
They're trying.
But then there's the other side. This is where stable coins come in, because stable coins change the dynamic of the conversation entirely, because they're being used now to provide a new source of liquidity that can extend these kick the can down the road cycles even further. That means institutions can manage systemic risk and maintain broader market stability, sure. But when you look at, for instance, stable coins overall, and yeah, sure, Tether, we can definitely tie this to Tether, but the proposed digital dollar, it gives the perfect example of what we're talking about here, because it allows the US Treasury and the Federal Reserve to expand the reach of the US dollar in a digital format. And this is essentially basically the deep state getting its hands into the pie. And I said this word for word long before David Sachs stood right by Donald Trump and discussed this live. It gave me goosebumps. So I think that's their mechanism to get their hands into this ecosystem, but they still need XRP.
I think the stable coin is the bridge. The key word is bridge. BlackRock and JP Morgan. Those two, if you can solve it for them, you can solve it for the rest of Wall Street. You can solve it for the big regionals.
I'm going to show you something.
BlackRock and JP Morgan need a bridge to the digital world. Go ahead.
This is it. I did a whole report on this in detail. This is one of the bridges they're using with the whole stable coins. Stronghold. This is what they're using to get a lot of the value on chain. And like you said last time, so what if they use Bitcoin? So what if they use Ethereum? Let them bring it on board. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're using this technology to do it. It's one of them. Anyways,
Yeah.
I've researched this thoroughly and I've shared it with the audience before. And by the way, anyone investing in crypto, this is certainly a massive opportunity.
Oh, I think that's easily 100x coming.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I heard about Stronghold 2 years ago, and I've got
hopefully for me. No. But
I
yeah,
have a client in Texas who's loaded up with Stronghold. Okay, the key is bridge from one world to the other, and you know Cardano's. Oh gosh, I can't think of his name. The Cardano's president.
Charles Hoskinson, if I'm not mistaken.
Hoskinson, something like that. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
He basically raised a white flag.